Now I'd like to review the work of Ian Stevenson. He first published a reincarnation case in 1960, wrote the classic book, 20 Cases of Reincarnation, in 66. Then he got a grant or an endowment from the inventor of the Xerox process, Chester Carlton, who gave $1 million to the University of Virginia specifically to allow Stevenson to research reincarnation full-time. And that's what he did. He traveled all over the world over a period of 40 years studying children who spontaneously remembered past lives. And he chose only to study children because he thought adults can fabricate memories, make up memories, read history, and then incorporate what they've learned into what they believe are memories. But it's hard to explain how a young child has detailed memories when the child doesn't even read yet. So he studied about 2,500 cases, and about 1,000 of these are what he calls solved, where the past lifetime was objectively validated. And in the typical Stevenson case, the child, as soon as they can speak, at 3 years of age or so, the child says to their parents, you know, my name is not what you're calling me, my name is so-and-so, you're not my parents are named so-and-so, this is not my house, and I want to go back to my real home. And the child gives so much specific information that the biologic family can find the past life family. And the child then can do additional identifications, name people by name who they've never met before, to the extent that the past life family accepts the child as the reincarnation of their deceased loved ones. And he has about 1,000 of these cases that he called validated. He also focused a great deal on birthmarks. He found that individuals who died in a prior lifetime from a gunshot wound or stab wound would have a scar or birthmark in that same spot. And he has a huge 2,000-page book, 2-volume book on this phenomenon. He first published a case with similar facial features, though in 1997, so quite late in his career. He retired in 2002, died in 2007, and then Jim Tucker took over for him and continues to work there at the University of Virginia. And one thing that I'm happy about is Ian Stevenson was very cautious and very skeptical and wanted to remain as scientific as possible. And he was very reluctant to use the word proof. And in fact, there's a quote once where he says the only proof that exists is in mathematics. But Jim Tucker on national television, when he appeared with James Leninger, a case that I'll touch upon, did say on national television, it was one of the morning shows, one of the national morning programs, stated that now there is sufficient evidence to conclude that reincarnation does exist. And before I, one thing that I, from my heart, really want to do is thank Dr. Stevenson for all the work he did. He's largely unknown. And one of the missions of ISIS really is to get his work available to people around the world. Part of the reason that he's not known more is his material is very difficult to read because he had such a focus on evidence. He almost wrote like a lawyer scientist. And he was careful to cite where the evidence came from, who were the witnesses, what each witness said specifically. Did different witnesses corroborate the same information? He had people sign affidavits that they weren't lying, like in xenoglossy cases where an individual was able to speak a language that they didn't learn. He would have everybody in the family sign affidavits testifying that nobody in the family knows this language. There's no way the person learned it by normal means. He would even have these people take lie detector tests. And he enlisted other scholars. When he traveled to study a case in India, he would enlist scholars from India, university scholars, to help him. I mean, if he had a xenoglossy case that involved the Bengali language, he couldn't speak it, so he had to get Bengali scholars to assess the case. He had those folks sign affidavits. So it's difficult reading. You know, it's like trying to read a court case. And one of the things that I'm doing is writing easy-to-read synopses of the cases, which are posted on the website as well as in the Born Again book, so that the cases are like stories that are accessible. So again, thank you, Dr. Stevenson. I'm going to just go over a couple cases that he studied that are quite phenomenal in terms of the facial feature aspect. This involves a man named Rashid Kadej, who died in 1968 in a car accident. He was a mechanic. He went with a friend named Ibrahim for a ride. They spun out. Rashid was thrown from the car, died from head injuries. About a year later, Daniel Jurdy was born in 1969. As soon as he could speak, he told his parents, you know, my name is not Daniel, it's Rashid Kadej. And he said, this is not my village. My village is called Fermata. And this case was in Lebanon. And he gave enough information to the biologic parents that they were able to find the Kadej family. And Daniel was able to identify all the relatives, the past life family relatives by name, and to the point that they accepted him as the reincarnation of their deceased loved one. And they even keep a cot for him, and he visits once a month and stays with them. Wow. And he had precocious behavior, reflecting still being the adult Rashid. For instance, in kindergarten, he told his kindergarten teacher that his name was Rashid Kadej, and he pinched her, you know, trying to get a date. Well, what happened is Ian Stevenson studied this case back in the 70s. Remember, he studied people when they were kids. So Ian Stevenson studied Daniel back in the 70s. Then in 1998, he revisited him because there was a reporter from the Washington Post called Tom Schroeder who was writing a book about Stevenson. And he traveled with him to research new cases in Lebanon, as well as revisit cases that were studied before. So Schroeder and Stevenson went back to visit Daniel Jurdy. Now he's a full-grown adult. And Stevenson realized he looks exactly like he did in the prior incarnation. So this is Daniel Jurdy holding a picture of his past life persona, Rashid Kadej. So what's really significant is we're assessing a case prospectively, watching it over time, which is the strongest kind of case. This case is basically the same kind of case. Dr. Stevenson studied Suzanne Ghanam back in the late 60s or early 70s. The history here is Hanan Mansour was married to a police officer from a well-to-do family. She had 3 kids. After the 3rd child, she developed heart problems and had to have open heart surgery. They couldn't do it in Lebanon, so she went to Virginia to have it done, where she had a brother living. And before the surgery, she tried to call home, in particular to talk to her daughter, whose name was Layla. And she called and called and called, but couldn't get through. She told her brother, if anything happens to me, divide my jewelry among my daughters. The next day she had surgery. The following day she died. 10 days later, just 10 days later, Suzanne Ghanam was born. Before she could read or write, or was taught to read or write, she scribbled a number on a piece of paper that was the Mansour's family's phone number with 2 digits transcribed. Or transposed. She repeatedly, as a toddler would pick up the phone off the hook and ask for Layla. And her parents didn't know a Layla. And they said, who's Layla? And she said, she was my daughter. And the parents were puzzled and said, what are you talking about? And little Suzanne said, ask me later when my head is bigger. And that's exactly what happened. Within a year, she named 13 family members from the Mansour family. Gave enough information to be reunited with the Mansours, who were initially very skeptical and thought maybe this is some kind of scam. But even the husband of Hanan Mansour came to believe that this little girl is the reincarnation of his deceased wife, because he could show her photographs of them at social events, and she could name their friends, people that she had no chance of meeting in this lifetime, and identify them specifically by name. Again, Stevenson studied Suzanne back in the 70s and revisited her in 1998 with Tom Schroeder. Now she's a full-grown adult, and she looks exactly like she did in the prior incarnation. And again, a prospective evaluation, which is the strongest kind of research.